thought she'd be holding my hand when I turned 65. Instead, I woke up alone, in a condo I paid for, with nothing but silence, no letter, no goodbye, just the sound of my own breath and the echo of promises she never meant to keep. I don't want revenge. I just want to understand how I let it happen. This is my story. I remember standing in that tiny jewelry shop in Divisoria, holding a silver bracelet up to the light, thinking about how perfect it would look on Felina's wrist. "Sir, very beautiful for your wife," the vendor said, and I didn't correct her. Wife. The word felt warm in my chest, like something I'd been waiting my whole life to hear about someone who actually deserved it. "I'll take it," I told her, counting out the pesos. "And can you gift wrap it?" The plan was simple. Felina's birthday was coming up next month, but I wanted to surprise her early. A weekend trip to Siargao. Just the two of us. White sand, clear water, and maybe finally the conversation I'd been building up to for months. The one about forever. I'd already booked the flights and the resort. I'd even packed a little velvet box in my carry-on, though I wasn't sure I was ready to use it yet. But the bracelet, that was safe. That was just showing her how much she meant to me without scaring her off. "Edwin, you're spoiling me again," she said when I walked through our condo door, hiding the gift bag behind my back. Our condo? I loved saying that. Even though technically her name was on the lease, it felt like ours. Everything we'd built together felt like ours. "Close your eyes," I said, and she laughed that musical laugh that made my heart skip every single time. "What did you do now?" But she closed them anyway, tilting her head like a curious bird. God, she was beautiful. Even after 2 years together, I still couldn't believe someone like her could love someone like me. I slipped the bracelet onto her wrist and watched her face light up when she opened her eyes. "Edwin, it's gorgeous. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," I said, meaning it. "I always want to give you beautiful things." She kissed me then, soft and sweet, and I felt that familiar surge of gratitude. After Martha, after 23 years of marriage that ended with papers served through a lawyer and a house that felt like a tomb, I thought I was done. I thought love was something that happened to other people, younger people, people who hadn't already used up their chances. But Felina changed that. Felina changed everything. "So," I said, sitting down beside her on the couch we'd picked out together, "how would you feel about a little trip? Somewhere special?" Her eyes widened. "A trip? Edwin, you know I can't afford." "My treat," I said quickly. "Everything. I just want to spend time with you, away from work, away from the city. Just us." She was quiet for a moment, turning the bracelet on her wrist, and something flickered across her face that I couldn't quite read, but then she smiled and I forgot about it. "Where were you thinking?" "Siargao, 3 days, 2 nights. I already booked it." "You already booked it?" She laughed, but there was something different in her voice. "Edwin, you can't just what? Can't just want to make the woman I love happy?" The word slipped out before I could stop it. Love. We danced around it for months, both of us too scared to say it first. But there it was, hanging in the air between us like something precious and fragile. Felina's face went soft, and for a moment I thought she might cry. "Edwin, I know it's fast," I said, rushing to fill the silence. "I know we said we'd take things slow, but I can't help how I feel. I love you, Felina. I love our life together. I love waking up next to you every morning and falling asleep to your voice every night. I love the way you sing in the shower and leave your coffee cups everywhere and argue with the TV during those Filipino dramas." She was definitely crying, now, but she was smiling too. "I love you too," she whispered, and my heart nearly exploded with relief. "Good," I said, pulling her closer, because I was thinking, maybe it's time we started making some real plans. Together plans. What kind of plans? I'd been thinking about this for weeks. The rocking chairs I'd ordered for the balcony. The way she'd mentioned wanting a garden. The marriage visa paperwork I'd started researching online. I want to grow old with you, Felina. Here, in the Philippines. I want to build something real with you. She nestled against my chest, and I felt her nod. I want that too. But even as she said it, even as I held her and felt her warmth and breathed in the scent of her shampoo, something nagged at me. The way she'd hesitated when I mentioned the trip, the way she'd been glued to her phone lately, taking calls in the other room, the way she sometimes looked at me like she was seeing someone else. I pushed the thoughts away. This was what happiness felt like, wasn't it? This uncertainty, this fear that it might disappear. I'd been alone too long. I'd forgotten how to trust good things. So Siargao? I asked. Siargao, she confirmed, and kissed my cheek. I should have paid more attention to the way she said it, like she was agreeing to something she didn't really want, like she was buying time. But I was too happy to notice, too grateful to question, too in love to see what was right in front of me. The first time I saw Felina's face, it was pixelated and frozen on my laptop screen during a Zoom call that was cutting in and out every 30 seconds. It was April 2021, right in the middle of lockdown, and I was going stir-crazy in my house in Pittsburgh. 3 months into early retirement, 2 months after the divorce papers were finalized, and I felt like I was disappearing. "Can you hear me?" she was saying, her voice crackling through my computer speakers. "Edwin, are you there?" I was there, but I wasn't sure where there was anymore. The language exchange group had been Jim's idea. His wife had died the year before, and he'd moved to Davao to start over. Join one of those conversation groups, he'd told me during one of our late-night calls. Practice your Filipino, meet some people, keeps your brain working. I didn't give a damn about learning Filipino, but I needed something to fill the hours between coffee and sleep. "I'm here," I managed, adjusting my laptop camera. "Sorry, the connection is terrible." "It's okay," she said, and when her image finally stabilized, I felt something shift in my chest. She was younger than me, obviously. Mid-30s maybe. But there was something in her eyes, something that looked like it understood loneliness. "I'm Felina," she said, "from Cagayan de Oro. This is my first time doing this." "Edwin," I replied. "Pittsburgh. Also my first time." We were paired up for 15 minutes of conversation practice. She was supposed to help me with basic Filipino phrases, and I was supposed to help her with English pronunciation. But we ended up talking about everything else. About how strange it felt to be stuck inside while the world ended. About missing normal things like grocery shopping and restaurant meals. About feeling like we were in some kind of suspended animation. "What did you do before all this?" she asked. "Insurance adjuster. 32 years. Just retired." I didn't mention that I'd taken early retirement because staying in that office, in that life, after Martha left, felt like drowning in slow motion. Wow. 32 years. That's a whole life. Yeah, well, time for a new one, I guess. She smiled at that, and something about the way she looked at me made me feel seen for the first time in months. "What about you?" I asked. "I teach English online, and I sell things on Facebook. Skincare, accessories, whatever people want. I'm always working on something." I liked that about her immediately. The hustle. The refusal to sit still. After watching Martha drift through our marriage like she was sleepwalking, Felina's energy was intoxicating. We started talking every week, then twice a week, then every day. The 15-minute sessions became hour-long calls. The language practice became real conversations about real things. About her family in the provinces, my son who wouldn't return my calls, the way it felt to start over when you thought your life was already written. "I've been thinking," she said one night, about 6 months in. It was morning for her, evening for me, and we'd gotten used to the time difference. "Maybe life doesn't have acts. Maybe it's more like seasons." "Seasons?" "Like, you think winter is over, you know. You think you're done with winter. But then you realize you're just in a different kind of winter. Or maybe spring. Maybe you're in spring now and you don't even know it. I'd never thought of my life as seasonal, but lying there in my empty house, talking to this woman on the other side of the world who made me laugh every single day, spring didn't seem impossible. I think I'd like to visit the Philippines someday, I said. Really, really. When all this pandemic stuff is over, I think I'd like to see where you live. She was quiet for a moment. I'd like that too. It took another year before I could actually make the trip. By then, we'd talked every single day for 15 months. I knew her voice better than I knew my own. I knew she liked her coffee with too much sugar and cried during romantic movies and worried about her mother's diabetes. I knew she worked too hard and didn't charge enough for her time and had dreams of opening her own tutoring center someday. And she knew me, really knew me. She knew about the loneliness that had eaten away at my marriage like rot. She knew about the guilt I carried for not fighting harder, for letting Martha slip away without ever really trying to understand why. She knew I'd spent the first 60 years of my life feeling like I was playing a character in someone else's story. When I finally stepped off the plane in Cagayan de Oro, she was waiting for me with a sign that said, "Welcome home, Edwin," instead of just my name. Home. I hadn't had one of those in a very long time. "So," she said, after I'd dropped my bags at the hotel and we were sitting in a quiet restaurant, finally face to face after all those months of screens. "What do you think?" "About what?" "About here. About this." She gestured between us. "About me." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I think," I said, "I might never want to leave." She smiled, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been restless my whole life. 6 months later, I put my house in Pittsburgh on the market. 3 months after that, I was a permanent resident of the Philippines, sleeping next to Filipina every night in a condo we'd found together, waking up every morning to a life that finally felt like mine. "Are you happy?" she asked me one night, about a year after I'd moved. "Happier than I've ever been," I told her, and I meant it. I thought that was enough. I thought happiness was something you could hold on to just by wanting it badly enough. I thought love was a decision you made once and then lived inside of forever. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I wasn't wrong about loving her. The first time I noticed something was different. Felina was standing in our kitchen at 11 p.m., still fully dressed, talking to someone on her phone in rapid Cebuano. She'd been doing that a lot lately, taking calls in different rooms, speaking in dialects I couldn't follow even after 2 years of trying to learn. "Who was that?" I asked when she finally hung up. "Just my cousin Liza," she said, not meeting my eyes. Business stuff. Business stuff. Everything was business stuff lately. The late nights. The whispered conversations. The way she'd suddenly developed an urgent need to check her messages every 5 minutes. "This late? You know how it is. People shop at all hours online." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But there was something in her voice, something tired and careful, that made my stomach turn. "Are you okay?" I asked. "You seem stressed." She finally looked at me then, and for just a second, I saw something that looked like guilt flicker across her face. "I'm fine, Edwin. Just working hard. Money's been tight." Money. It always came back to money with Felina, even though I'd never made it an issue between us. I paid for everything. Rent, utilities, groceries, her niece's school fees. I'd even given her capital to expand whatever business ventures she was always juggling. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because that's what you do for the person you love. "You don't have to carry everything alone," I said. "We're a team, remember?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know. I'm just tired tonight. Too tired to talk." She'd been too tired to talk for weeks now. Too tired for dinner conversations. Too tired for our evening walks along the river. Too tired for the kind of intimacy that used to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. I watched her disappear into the bathroom, heard the shower start, and tried to shake off the feeling that something was slipping away from me. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. No note, no goodbye kiss, just an empty space in the bed and the lingering scent of her perfume. She'd been doing that a lot too. Leaving early, coming home late, filling her days with activities that somehow never included me. "Where have you been?" I asked when she finally walked through the door at 9 p.m., looking exhausted and distracted. "Teaching, then helping Liza with inventory. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. She used to tell me about her day. Every student, every sale, every small victory or frustration. Now her life was a series of vague explanations and closed doors. "I missed you today," I said. "Missed you too," she replied, but she was already scrolling through her phone again. I tried to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. The last time she'd looked at me like I was someone she chose instead of someone she was stuck with. The last time she'd said my name like it meant something to her. "Felina?" Still not looking up. "Are we okay?" That got her attention. She set down her phone and turned to face me. And for a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth, whatever the truth was. "Of course we're okay," she said instead. "Why would you ask that? Because you used to talk to me. Because you used to laugh at my terrible jokes and steal food off my plate and fall asleep with your head on my shoulder while we watched movies. Because you used to look at me like I was the answer to prayers you'd been too afraid to say out loud." "Just checking," I said. She kissed my forehead, quick and distracted. "I'm going to shower and go to bed. Long day tomorrow. Another long day. Another day of being too busy for us." I sat alone in our living room, looking at the rocking chairs I'd had delivered the week before. They were still in their boxes, leaning against the wall. I'd been so excited about them. 2 matching chairs for our balcony. A place for us to sit together in the evenings, watching the sunset, talking about our day, planning our future. "Rocking chairs," Felina had said when she saw them. "Edwin, we don't have room for those." "We'll make room," I'd said. "They're for us, for growing old together. Remember?" She'd nodded and smiled, but something in her expression had looked almost sad. Now, staring at those unopened boxes, I wondered if she'd seen something I was too hopeful to notice. Maybe we weren't growing old together. Maybe we weren't growing anything at all. My phone buzzed with a text. For a wild moment, I hoped it was Felina, sending me some sweet message from the other room like she used to do when we first moved in together. It wasn't Felina. It was Jim, checking in from Davao. "How are things, brother? Haven't heard from you in a while. How were things?" I stared at the question for a long time before typing back. "Fine. Everything's fine." But as I sent the message and heard the shower turn off in the bathroom, I wondered who I was trying to convince. Jim or myself. The woman I loved was disappearing right in front of me, and I was too scared to ask where she was going. I should have known something was wrong when I couldn't find the property papers. They'd been in the manila envelope in our bedroom drawer, right next to my passport and the photos from our trip to Bohol. All our important documents lived in that drawer. Insurance papers, lease agreements, receipts, everything organized and safe, except the envelope was gone. "Felina?" I called out. She was getting ready for work in the bathroom, and I could hear her humming something under her breath. A song I didn't recognize. "Have you seen that brown envelope? The one with the condo papers?" The humming stopped. "Which envelope?" She called back, but her voice sounded different. "Careful. The property documents. For this place. I need to check something about the maintenance fees." There was a long pause. Too long. "Oh, that," she said finally. "It's with the broker, remember? For the insurance renewal. The broker. Right. Except I didn't remember that conversation. And I was pretty sure we'd never discussed insurance renewal. But Felina sounded so certain, so casual, that I almost let it go. Almost. "Which broker?" I asked. Another pause. "Edwin, I'm running late. Can we talk about this tonight? But we both knew we wouldn't talk about it tonight. We hadn't really talked about anything in weeks. That afternoon, while Felina was teaching her online classes, I walked down to the building office. Mrs. Santos, the property manager, had always been friendly to me. She remembered my name, asked about Felina, smiled when she saw me in the lobby. "Mr. Edwin," she said when I approached her desk. "How can I help you today?" "I just wanted to check on our account," I said. "Make sure the maintenance fees are up to date." Of course, of course." She pulled up something on her computer, typed for a moment, then frowned. "Mr. Edwin, I show here that Miss Felina is the account holder. I cannot share information with non-residents unless she gives permission." Non-residents. The word hit me like a slap. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. I live here. We've been living here for over a year." Mrs. Santos looked uncomfortable. Yes, I know you live here. But the lease, it's only under Miss Felina's name. For legal purposes, you are considered a guest. In the home I'd been paying for. In the life I thought we were building together. "Can you tell me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "is the rent current? I just want to make sure everything is okay." She clicked through her computer again, and something in her expression changed. "Mr. Edwin, perhaps you should speak with Miss Felina about this." "About what?" "About the account status. I really cannot say more without her permission." But she'd already said enough. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes. The way her fingers drummed nervously on her desk. The way she kept glancing toward the door like she was hoping someone would rescue her from this conversation. I walked back to the elevator feeling like the world had tilted slightly off its axis. In the ride up to our floor, I tried to piece together what I'd just learned. The lease was in Felina's name only. The account had some kind of status issue. And somewhere, documents I should have access to were missing. When I got back to the condo, Felina was in the middle of an online class, speaking animated English to students I couldn't see through her laptop screen. I sat on the couch and watched her. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. She was beautiful, still beautiful, but there was something different about the way she held herself, something guarded, like she was performing even when she thought no one was watching. "Good job, Maria," she was saying to one of her students. "Your pronunciation is much better. Let's practice the conditional tense now." Conditional tense. If I had known, if I had paid attention, if I had asked the right question sooner. After she finished the class, she closed her laptop and turned to me with a bright smile. Too bright. "How was your day?" she asked. "I went to the building office," I said. The smile flickered. "Oh? Why?" "Looking for information about those maintenance fees." "But Mrs. Santos said she couldn't tell me anything because the lease is only in your name." Felina's face went carefully blank. "Edwin, you know that's just how they do things here. For legal reasons. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't it? What are you asking me?" I looked at her, this woman I'd moved across the world for, and realized I didn't know how to ask the questions that were forming in my mind. How do you ask someone if they're lying to you? How do you ask if the life you think you're living together is real? "Where are the property documents, Felina?" She sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "I told you, they're with the broker." "What's the broker's name?" "Edwin." "What's his name? Where's his office? What insurance renewal are we talking about?" She stood up, sudden and sharp. "Why are you interrogating me? What's this really about?" "It's about feeling like there are things you're not telling me. It's about feeling like I don't understand my own life anymore." For just a moment, something cracked in her composure. I saw fear there, or maybe guilt, or maybe just exhaustion. But then she pulled herself together and gave me that bright, false smile again. "You're being paranoid," she said. "Everything is fine. I'll get the documents back tomorrow and show you everything, okay?" But I knew, even as she said it, that tomorrow would bring another excuse, another delay, another version of the truth that didn't quite fit together. That night, lying next to her in our bed, listening to her breathe, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long I'd been living in a story someone else was writing, and I wondered what would happen when I finally found out how it ended. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Mrs. Santos's face, the way she'd looked at me like I was someone to be pitied. A guest. That's what she'd called me. A guest in my own life. At 3 in the morning, I got up and went to the kitchen. I made coffee and sat at our dining table, the one we'd picked out together at SM Mall, and tried to add up everything I'd spent in the past year and a half. The condo deposit, first and last month's rent, the furniture, the appliances, the renovation work when we decided to update the bathroom and kitchen, Felina's business, investments, her niece's tuition, the monthly allowances I gave her family, the trips we'd taken, the gifts, the dinners, the everyday expenses of two people building a life together. I didn't have exact numbers, but it was substantial, more than I'd ever spent on anyone or anything in my entire life, more than I'd spent on my own son's college education, and I hadn't minded. That was the thing that made my chest ache as I sat there in the dark. I'd been happy to spend it, grateful to have someone to spend it on. After 23 years of marriage where every dollar was negotiated and every purchase was analyzed to death, being with Felina had felt like freedom. Don't worry about money. I'd told her a dozen times. That's what it's for, to take care of the people we love. But sitting there at 4 a.m., looking around at a home that wasn't legally mine, I started to wonder if love was the right word for what had been happening. I called Jim. I knew it was early, but he'd always been a night owl, and Davao was only an hour ahead. Edwin? He sounded concerned. Everything okay? Can I ask you something? Shoot. How much did you spend on Elena before you figured out she was seeing someone else? Long pause. Elena had been Jim's girlfriend before he met his current partner, a younger woman who'd strung him along for 8 months while maintaining a relationship with a local businessman. Why are you asking me that? Just curious. Edwin, what's going on? I told him about the missing documents, about Mrs. Santos calling me a guest, about Felina's late nights and private phone calls and the way she'd been looking at me lately like I was a problem she was trying to solve. Shit, Jim said when I finished. How long has this been going on? I don't know. Weeks? Months? Maybe I just wasn't paying attention. Or maybe you didn't want to pay attention. That hit harder than I expected. What's that supposed to mean? It means sometimes we see what we want to see, brother. Sometimes we're so grateful to not be alone anymore that we ignore the signs. What signs? You tell me. What does your gut say? My gut said I was in trouble. My gut said the woman sleeping in the next room had been planning something I wasn't going to like. My gut said I'd been living in a fantasy while real life happened around me. Jim, can I ask you something else? Yeah. Do you think they actually love us? Or do you think we're just convenient? Another long pause. I think it's complicated. I think some of them start out just looking for security and then real feelings develop. And some of them never get past seeing us as walking ATMs. How do you tell the difference? You ask yourself, what happens if the money stops flowing? After I hung up, I sat there until sunrise, thinking about that question. What would happen if the money stopped flowing? If I couldn't pay the rent anymore, couldn't fund Felina's business ventures, couldn't send money to her family or take her on trips or buy her gifts just because I loved seeing her smile? Would she still want to grow old with me? Would she still take my hand and tell me I was the man she'd been praying for? Would she still curl up against me at night and make me feel like the luckiest bastard in the Philippines? I was afraid I already knew the answer. When Felina got up a few hours later, she found me still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my empty coffee cup. Edwin? Are you okay? You look terrible. Just couldn't sleep. She poured herself coffee and sat down across from me. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with, concerned, present, real. What's wrong? I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to ask her to be honest with me, to tell me what was really happening, to give us a chance to fix whatever was broken. But looking at her face, I realized I was scared of what she might say. Nothing, I lied. Just thinking about my son. Relief flickered across her features so quickly I almost missed it. You should call him, she said. Family is important. Family, right. Except my son hadn't returned my calls in 6 months. Not since I'd told him I was moving to the Philippines permanently. Not since he'd accused me of having a midlife crisis and abandoning my responsibilities. Maybe he'd been right about more than I'd wanted to admit. Yeah, I said. Maybe I will. Felina kissed the top of my head before heading to the shower, and I closed my eyes and tried to remember what it felt like when that kiss meant something real. The first night Felina didn't come home, I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Work had run late. She'd decided to stay with her cousin Liza. Her phone battery had died. There were 100 innocent reasons why someone might not come home to the person who loved them. But I knew. Sitting alone in our condo at midnight, staring at my phone, I knew this wasn't about work or family or dead batteries. This was about whatever had been building between us for weeks, whatever I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. I tried texting. Are you okay? Just let me know you're safe. The message showed as delivered but not read. By 2 a.m., I was pacing the living room, checking my phone every 30 seconds like somehow that would make her respond. By 4 a.m., I was sitting on the edge of our bed, looking at the indent her head had left on her pillow, wondering if she'd planned this. If she'd known, when she kissed me goodbye yesterday morning, that it was actually goodbye. The second night was worse. I called Liza. Edwin? She sounded surprised to hear from me. Is everything okay? Is Felina with you? A pause. With me? No. Why would she be with me? She didn't come home last night. Or tonight. I thought maybe. Oh. Another pause. Longer this time. Edwin, I think maybe you should talk to Felina about this. I would if I could reach her. Liza, do you know where she is? I can't really. She trailed off, and I could hear voices in the background. Someone was telling her something, urgent and quiet. Liza, please. I'm worried about her. She's safe, she said finally. She's safe. But Edwin, I think maybe she needs some space right now. Space. The word every man dreads hearing from the woman he loves. Space from what? I think you should ask her that. How can I ask her anything if she won't answer my calls? I'm sorry, Edwin. I really am. But this isn't my business. After she hung up, I sat in the dark and tried to figure out when I'd become the kind of man people felt sorry for. When I'd become someone who needed to be managed and handled and lied to for his own good. The third day, I went to Liza's house. It was a small place in a crowded barangay about 20 minutes from our condo. I'd been there once before, for a family birthday party. Felina had been so proud to introduce me to everyone. This is Edwin, she'd said, my American. Like I was a prize she'd won. Now, standing at Liza's front door, I felt like an intruder. Edwin! Liza looked genuinely shocked to see me. What are you doing here? Looking for Felina. She's not here. Where is she? Liza glanced behind her, then stepped outside and pulled the door closed. Edwin, you shouldn't be here. Where else should I be? This is my life we're talking about. My relationship. I have a right to know what's happening. She left, Liza said quietly. 3 days ago, for Manila. Manila, 800 kilometers away. A different world. Why? Liza looked at her feet. I think she was scared. Scared of what? Scared of me? No, not of you. Of disappointing you, I think. Of not being what you needed her to be. I laughed, but it came out bitter. What I needed her to be was honest. Edwin, did you know? About whatever this is? Did you know she was planning to leave? I knew she was struggling, Liza said, carefully. I knew she felt trapped, but I didn't know she was going to leave like this. Trapped. By what? By the life we'd built together? By the man who loved her enough to move across the world for her? Is there someone else? I asked. The question hung between us like something toxic. Liza's face crumpled with pity. I can't answer that, she said, but she didn't have to. The answer was in her eyes, in the way she couldn't look at me, in the careful way she'd chosen her words. I drove back to the condo in a daze. Everything looked the same but felt completely different. The security guard greeted me like always. The elevator played the same cheerful music. Our door opened to the same furniture, the same decorations, the same life we'd been living together. But it was empty now. Not just quiet. Empty. I walked through the rooms like I was touring a museum exhibit. Here's where they used to eat breakfast together. Here's where they watched movies. Here's the bathroom where she used to sing in the shower. In the bedroom, I opened her closet. Most of her clothes were still there, but the important things were gone. Her favorite dress, her good shoes, the jewelry box I'd given her for Christmas. Her toothbrush was gone from the bathroom. The mug she always used for her morning coffee was missing from the kitchen. She'd packed the pieces of herself that mattered and left the rest behind like set decoration. I picked up my phone and typed out a message. Are we okay? Simple. Direct. The same question I'd asked her a dozen times over the past few weeks when I could feel her slipping away. I sent it and watched the screen. Delivered. Then nothing. No response. No read receipt. Just silence, stretching out like a road I couldn't see the end of. That night, I slept on the couch. I couldn't bear to lie in our bed alone, surrounded by the ghost of her presence. But the couch wasn't much better. From there, I could see the rocking chairs, still in their boxes against the wall, still waiting to be assembled, still waiting for a future that apparently wasn't coming. I thought about calling my son. I thought about calling Jim. I thought about calling anyone who might understand what it felt like to have your entire life disappear while you weren't paying attention. Instead, I just sat there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the building settling around me, and wondered how long it would take before I stopped expecting to hear her key in the lock. I spent the next week reading through our old messages. 2 years of text conversations, saved in my phone like evidence of a life I thought I'd been living. I don't know what I was looking for exactly. Clues, maybe. Signs I'd missed. Some explanation for how we'd gone from planning to grow old together to me sitting alone in a condo I wasn't even legally allowed to live in. The early messages were painful to read. So much hope. So much genuine affection. Good morning, handsome, she'd written on day 15 of our correspondence, back when we were still just virtual strangers getting to know each other across time zones. I dreamed about you last night. Is that weird to say? It hadn't been weird. It had been everything I'd needed to hear. After months of feeling invisible in my own marriage, after years of conversations that felt like negotiations and silences that felt like punishment, Felina's messages had been like sunlight through a window I'd forgotten existed. I dreamed about you too, I'd written back. I dreamed we were sitting on a beach somewhere, just talking. Nothing fancy. Just us. Maybe someday, she'd replied, and included a heart emoji that had made me smile for the first time in weeks. Maybe someday. How many times had she said that? Maybe someday we'd travel through Europe together. Maybe someday we'd buy a little house in the provinces. Maybe someday we'd get married and make it official. Maybe someday had been her specialty. The future tense. The conditional. The possibility of something beautiful just around the corner, just out of reach, just waiting for the right moment. I scrolled forward to the messages from after I'd moved to the Philippines. The tone was different then, more present, more real. I can't believe you're actually here. She'd written after our first week living together. I can't believe this is my life now. Good different or bad different? I'd asked. The best different. I feel safe with you, Edwin. I feel like I can breathe. Safe. She'd used that word a lot in the beginning. Not loved, exactly. Not cherished or adored or any of the romantic words I'd been hoping for, but safe. like I was shelter from something she'd never quite explained. I kept reading, looking for the moment when everything changed, when safe became trapped, when maybe someday became I need space, when I love you became silence. But there was no single moment, just a gradual shift in the tone of her messages. Shorter responses, longer delays, practical conversations about bills and schedules instead of dreams and possibilities. The last real conversation we'd had through text was 3 weeks ago. I'd sent her a photo of a sunset from our balcony. Beautiful night, I'd written. Yes, she'd replied. Not gorgeous or wish I was there to see it with you or any of the things she used to say. Just yes. I should have known then. I should have paid attention to the difference between yes and everything she wasn't saying. The very last message she'd sent me was 2 days before she disappeared. We'll be late tonight. Don't wait up. Don't wait up. 4 words that, in retrospect, felt like a goodbye I hadn't recognized. I closed the messaging app and opened our photo gallery instead. Hundreds of pictures, selfies from restaurants and beaches and quiet mornings in bed, formal shots from family gatherings and holidays, candid moments when we'd been laughing about something stupid and decided to capture it. In every single photo, I looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy, like a man who'd won the lottery and couldn't quite believe his luck. And Felina, she looked beautiful. She looked charming. She looked like exactly the kind of woman a lonely American retiree would fall in love with. But looking at the photos now, with everything I'd learned over the past week, I started to see something else, something careful in her smile, something performed, like she was playing a role she'd gotten very good at but never quite believed in. There was one photo that stopped me cold. We'd taken it about 6 months ago, during a trip to Siargao, the same trip I'd been planning to recreate for her birthday surprise. In the picture, we're sitting at a beachside restaurant, golden hour light making everything look magical. I'm looking at the camera, grinning like an idiot. But Felina is looking at me, and the expression on her face is complicated. There's fondness there, yes, maybe even love, but there's also something that looks like sadness, or guilt, or maybe just resignation, like she was already saying goodbye. I set down my phone and walked out to the balcony. The rocking chairs were still there, still in their boxes, still waiting. I'd been avoiding them for days, but now I sat down on one of the cardboard packages and tried to imagine what it would have been like if things had worked out, if we'd actually grown old together like she said we would. We'll grow old together, she'd whispered that night when I'd told her I loved her. You and me, Edwin, on this balcony, watching the city change around us. Had she meant it when she said it? Or had it always been just another maybe someday? Another beautiful possibility that was never quite supposed to become real? I thought about the way she'd looked at me that last morning, before she left for what I didn't know would be the last time. She'd kissed my forehead and told me to have a good day, just like always. Except her eyes had looked like she was memorizing me. Maybe she had meant it, in that moment. Maybe when she talked about growing old together, she'd been talking about the version of herself that existed in our conversations, in our shared fantasies, in the safe space we'd created between reality and dreams. Maybe she'd loved the idea of loving me. Maybe she'd loved the security I represented, the escape I offered, the version of herself she got to be when she was with me. But maybe that had never been enough to build a real life on. The sun was setting over Cagayan de Oro, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have made me reach for my phone to photograph if there had been anyone left to share it with. Instead, I just sat there on a cardboard box, watching the light fade, and finally accepted that some promises aren't meant to be kept. Some dreams aren't meant to come true. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to teach you something about yourself you didn't know you needed to learn. I'd learned that I was capable of love deeper than I'd ever imagined. I'd learned that I was brave enough to start over in a foreign country for the right person. I'd learned that I could be happy, truly happy, for the first time in decades. I'd also learned that love isn't always enough, that sometimes the person you'd give everything to doesn't want everything, that sometimes the life you're building together exists only in your imagination. The city lights were starting to come on below me, and somewhere out there, in Manila or wherever she'd really gone, Felina was starting a new chapter of her life, one that didn't include me. I hoped she'd be happy. I hoped she'd find whatever it was she'd been looking for when she decided I wasn't enough. And I hoped that someday, maybe someday, I'd be able to remember the good parts without feeling like they'd all been lies. My birthday arrived with the kind of quiet that feels deliberate. No morning texts, no surprise calls, no last-minute returns or explanations or apologies. Just another Tuesday in a life that had become unrecognizable to the man who'd been planning to celebrate turning 65 with the woman he loved. I'd been awake since 5 a.m., not because I was excited about the day, but because sleep had become unreliable. Dreams kept bringing Felina back, and waking up to remember she was gone felt like losing her all over again, every single morning. At 7, I made coffee for one. The second mug sat clean in the cabinet where it belonged now. I'd stopped automatically reaching for it about a week ago, which felt like progress of a kind. Jim called around 8. "Happy birthday, brother," he said, and his voice carried the careful cheerfulness people use when they're trying not to mention the obvious. "Thanks. Any plans for today?" "Plans. Right." I looked around the condo that still felt too big and too empty, even after 2 weeks of living alone in it. "Not really. Quiet. Day. You could come down to Davao. Maria's making her special adobo tonight." Maria was Jim's girlfriend. Nice woman. Real. Present. The kind of person who showed up when she said she would and meant what she said. I was happy for them, but being around their contentment felt like salt in a wound I was still learning how to carry. "Maybe next weekend," I lied. "Edwin, you can't just sit in that condo forever." "I'm not planning to sit here forever. Just today." After Jim hung up, I walked out to the balcony. The morning air was cool, unusual for this time of year, and the city was just starting to wake up below me. Traffic sounds, vendors calling out their goods, the ordinary music of a life continuing around me, whether I participated in it or not. The rocking chairs were still in their boxes, propped against the railing where I'd moved them a few days ago. I'd been meaning to return them, but every time I thought about loading them back into a taxi and explaining to some store clerk why I didn't need chairs for 2 anymore, the energy just left me. Today, though, looking at them on my 65th birthday, I felt something different. Not energy, exactly, but a kind of clarity. I found a box cutter in the kitchen drawer and went back outside. It took me 20 minutes to get the first chair out of its packaging. The instructions were in multiple languages, none of them particularly clear, but assembly was straightforward enough. Wooden pieces that fit together with screws and dowels, nothing complicated, nothing that required help from anyone else. I set up just one chair. The second box I carried to the elevator and down to the lobby. Mrs. Santos was at her desk, and when she saw me struggling with the package, she called over the maintenance man. "Mr. Edwin, what can we do for you?" "I want to sell this," I said. "Do you know anyone who might want a rocking chair?" Within an hour, I'd sold it to Mrs. Reyes from the 4th floor. She was setting up a nursery for her first grandchild and thought it would be perfect. She paid me half of what I'd spent, but I didn't care about the money. I just wanted it gone. Back upstairs, I made myself a simple lunch. Rice, leftover chicken, some vegetables, food for one person who wasn't trying to impress anyone or accommodate anyone else's preferences. It was the first meal I'd enjoyed in weeks. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since Felina left. I called my son. "Dad?" Michael sounded surprised. "Is everything okay?" "It's my birthday," I said. "Shit. Dad, I'm sorry. I completely forgot. How old are you now?" 65. 65. Wow. How are you celebrating?" How was I celebrating? I looked around the quiet condo, at the single rocking chair on the balcony, at the life I was learning to live alone. Quietly, I said, "Are you okay? You sound different." Different. That was one word for it. "I'm learning some things about myself," I said. "About what I want, what I need." That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just honest. We talked for 20 minutes, longer than we'd talked in over a year. He told me about his job, his girlfriend, the house they were thinking of buying. Normal life things, American life things. The kind of future I'd walked away from when I decided to follow love to the other side of the world. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you happy? In the Philippines, I mean. Is it what you thought it would be?" I looked out at the city where I'd thought I'd grow old with someone who'd turned out to be a beautiful stranger. "It's different than I thought it would be," I said. "But I'm learning things I needed to learn." "Like what?" "Like I'm braver than I thought I was. And maybe more foolish. But also more resilient." "That sounds like wisdom earned the hard way." "Yeah," I said. "I guess it is." After we hung up, I sat in my single rocking chair and watched the sun set over Cagayan de Oro. The chair rocked smoothly, comfortably. It was well made, solid wood, built to last. I thought about Felina, somewhere in Manila, or wherever she'd really gone. I wondered if she ever thought about me, if she missed anything about the life we'd shared, if she felt guilty about how she'd left, or if she'd already moved on to whatever came next. Mostly, though, I thought about the man I'd been when I first sat on this balcony with her. So grateful to be chosen, so terrified of being alone again, so willing to ignore red flags and uncomfortable truths because the alternative felt worse than death. That man had been brave in his way, but he'd also been desperate, and desperation makes you accept things you shouldn't accept. It makes you grateful for crumbs when you deserve the whole meal. The man sitting in this chair now was different. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, absolutely. But not desperate. Not anymore. I'd survived the worst thing I could imagine, losing the person I thought was my forever. And I was still here, still breathing, still capable of enjoying a sunset and a conversation with my son and the simple pleasure of a well-made rocking chair. "I thought we'd grow old together," I said to the empty air, to the ghost of promises that had turned out to be wishes. "But I guess I'll just grow." The words felt true as I said them. Not bitter, not angry, just true. I would grow. I would learn. I would figure out what came next for a 65-year-old man who'd followed his heart across the world and discovered that sometimes your heart doesn't know what's best for you. But that was okay. Hearts are meant to break sometimes. That's how the light gets in. As the last of the sunset faded from the sky, I rocked slowly in my chair and made a decision. Tomorrow, I would start something new. Not a relationship necessarily. Not another grand romantic gesture. But something. A hobby. A project. A reason to get up in the morning that didn't depend on anyone else showing up for me. I would learn to be enough for myself. Not because I'd given up on love, but because I'd finally learned the difference between love and need, between partnership and desperation, between growing old together and just growing. And maybe that was the best birthday gift I could have given myself. The gift of knowing I could be alone without being lonely. The gift of understanding that some chapters end so better ones can begin. The city lights twinkled below me like stars fallen to earth, and I rocked in my single chair and felt, for the first time in months, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because it was easy, not because it was what I'd planned, but because it was real. And after everything I'd been through, real was enough. More than enough. It was everything.